The BAC is distinguished for its leadership in educating a remarkable, diverse student body, advancing social equity through the design of landscape, architecture, interior space, sustainable environment, historical preservation, and spaces for human health. With the support of our exceptional practitioners and faculty, we remain at the forefront of integrating practice-based learning with academic study. This evening's event is the last in the fall 2025 Just Narratives lecture series. It embodies what it means to be part of something larger and to contribute to its ongoing environment, a core value of the BAC. Thinking beyond the constraints of traditional public meeting, how can designers prioritize community engagement as a method for building trust, sharing power, and strengthening a sense of belonging? Tonight, we're honored to welcome our guest speaker, Estello Raganit. Estello is a landscape architect and a senior open space planner with the city of Somerville. Prior to working in the public sector, Estello practiced at various Cambridge-based landscape architecture firms, working on and managing the design, planning, and construction of public projects across the country. He received his master in landscape architecture from Harvard Graduate School of Design, where he was the University Olmsted Scholar. In addition to having projects and drawings published in many landscape journals, his work has been recognized by Boston Society of Landscape Architects, where he served as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion co-chair. Estello remained interested in landscape architecture's power to forge link between our natural and built environment and individual and collective memory in place, folding this into his work. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Estello.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Yufan, for inviting me to speak to you all as part of a really exciting lecture series. And thank you for the really generous introduction. Again, my name is Estello Raganit, and I'm a landscape architect and a senior public space planner with the city of Somerville, here to talk about projects that I worked on both as a student and as a practitioner and landscape architect. But I want to first begin by taking this opportunity to break down what I mean by this lecture title, Community as Method, Engagement as Lesson. Community as method serves as both a declarative statement as well as a call to action. I assert that a civic project is most successful when members of the community are centered in the design work and are centered as part of the design process. Engagement as lesson is a reminder that every opportunity to interact with the public is an important benchmark for remembering the individuals who will benefit from the spaces we are privileged to design and think about, as a moment to reflect on our own processes and how we collect information from others. While many might argue that the process of collecting information is inherently extractive, this does not mean that we can't do so without preserving one's dignity. I also want to make a distinction that engagement is distinguished from participation, and that engagement works towards a deeper sense of knowing and interacting with the public. It denotes an inherent humanizing exchange. This talk is part case study and part reflection and self-evaluation, and I want to thank you all for being here with me tonight. I will be presenting 4 projects and 4 different tools and methods of communication, of community engagement across geographies, barriers, languages, and opportunities that I've conducted and continue to inform the importance of a deep learning and an even deeper sense of respect for the communities in which I've studied and worked. We will first begin in rural Oaxaca, Mexico, and then move across the pond to a project completed in Ireland and Northern Ireland, jump back to a local scale with a project in Cambridge, and then end with an original research project completed in Beijing, China. I want to preface that while 3 of the 4 projects were completed while I was a student, I hope this gives our students here and practitioners alike some inspiration for their own engagement efforts in order to advance how we continue to work with and in the public. To begin, I want to take you all to Oaxaca, Mexico, for the front-end research portion of a project that I worked on in collaboration with fellow classmates Isabel Brostea, Jessica Lim, and Walat Limbubu. The studio looked at the agency of mezcal, which many of you might know as it is now a very popular smoky spirit, similar to tequila in that it's distilled from the heart or the piña of the agave plant. Within the last 2 decades, mezcal has seen a meteoric rise in popularity, but many mezcal producers and distributors are facing challenges with scaling their operation because most of the mezcal produced for international markets is still produced in small village operations across Mexico, many of them in the state of Oaxaca. These small villages in the Oaxaca Valley are situated along river systems with river water used to grow crops, including the agave. The map on the left shows our project site, the village of San Agustina Matengo, and its relationship to the river in light blue as it snakes its way through south roughly 50 kilometers from the city of Oaxaca, which is shaded in that yellow. The exploded axonometric on the right diagrams very small, the process of making and distilling mezcal from the agave plants, and a typical layout for a mezcal distillery or a palenque. Farmers wait between 7 to 10 years for agaves to grow and ripen, developing sugars needed for proper fermentation. When it's time for harvesting, the agave plants are chopped down and their piñas dug up and trimmed, resembling a prepared deskinned pineapple, which is why they call it the piña. They are slow cooked in earthen pits, 30 piñas at a time for 24 to 36 hours, and are dug up and allowed to cool for a week prior to being cut up and ground by a large stone wheel and an obedient mule. The ground, pulpy hearts are then left to ferment in large wooden barrels. Seasoned mezcal makers will know when the fermented liquid is ready for distilling just by the bubbling sounds the fermenting pulp makes. Finally, the agave beer is boiled and distilled in metal cauldrons encased in cement. This distillate is then sent to distributors for packaging into the mezcal we know and many of us love. But as you may imagine, the process is both time-consuming, like waiting for agaves to grow, and incredibly resource-intensive. Increasing demand of mezcal has also seen an equal increase in felling trees to sustain the long, high-heat distillation process, as well as increased dependency on water pumped from the river to cool the distillate. And we see agaves now replacing other staple crops, painting the valley with strokes of blue-green. But unfortunately for you all, this isn't a talk solely on mezcal production, but on community engagement. And our task was to, in 3 days, understand land and water use in mezcal production while learning about village life in rural Oaxaca. As a team, we led a village meeting and distributed booklets that had informational conversations with the villagers. The materials included pre-made booklets, markers, stamps, and stickers for the children. Our team looked at 3 themes for our engagement: cultura, culture, agua, water, and tierra, land, and created small booklets, all in Spanish, to be filled out by the villagers of San Agustina Matengo. We also created a separate booklet for children with stickers and stamps and asked them about their favorite places to gather and play in the village. The agave stickers were representations of the species of agave used to make mezcal, while the stickers on the top right were representations of buildings in the village. For the culture book, which was a means of getting a glimpse at daily life, we asked people to point out what or where on the map they lived and major landmarks, and asked questions like, what had they had for dinner yesterday, to understand their diet and access to food, as well as when the last time they went to church was, when the last time they went to the hospital, the city of Oaxaca, etc. To understand how people used water, we asked questions like, how and where do you get drinking water? How do you use the river? And what happens when it rains and storms in Amatengo? Finally, to learn about the villagers' relationship to land, we asked, from where and how often do people get their food? Where do you get your firewood for cooking? We also asked farmers to fill out a circular chart to describe what crops they grew and during what months, shown in the bottom right. With the help from the village mayor, we hosted a community meeting with over 20 participants and asked them to fill out our workbooks. Our Spanish-speaking colleagues took charge in facilitating the discussions to gather information on our 3 topics. There were a few reservations at first, but it took a few leaders in the community to take charge and answer questions to allow everyone to feel safe to engage in the activity. The community meeting lasted about 2 hours, and we provided food and snacks to the villagers in attendance, which is key to any public gathering such as this. The workbooks were a great way to survey people in mass, allowing them to pick and choose which topics were relevant, to answer and complete multiple workbooks. Um, and while very few of the books were actually fully complete, each one had snippets of useful information that helped inform the design work to come. Upon reflecting on the activity, we noted that some of the challenges were aspects of our design education that we took for granted, including filling out the crop diagram, which could have been simplified, and locating specific spaces and buildings on a map. The kids, though, had a lot of fun drawing in the workbooks and feeling a sense of pride that people would be interested in their village home. Upon returning, we compiled all of the quantitative data into a series of charts and graphs that help describe daily life of the villagers in Amatengo, including how frequently they go to church and how often they travel out of the village. We were also able to, with varying degrees of success, learn about the crops they grow and when, with a small caveat that simplicity of presentation is key to successful engagement. These workbooks were relatively accessible, easy to produce and pack, and needed very little guidance to complete. As a tool for community engagement, booklets just such as these emphasize that the questions we ask and how we ask them are just as important as the answers we get. This past April, the Oases of Mescal Symposium was held at the GSD, reflecting on this work and the years of work that came before and after it, with a panel dedicated to community engagement and community members in attendance as panelists. From this effort, my takeaway is that it is important to enter a space with a humility and to remember that lived experience is expertise. People are the subject matter experts of their own lives, and it is important that we, as designers, remember that we enter a space asking questions that will help inform our designs. The best results for engagement happen when people feel safe enough to tell you their story. To build upon this lesson, in this next case study, we will jump to Ireland and Northern Ireland, the borderlands for our studio and seminar project. This project looked at collective fieldwork as a means of understanding the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, following the uncertainty of the Brexit vote calling for Great Britain to leave the European Union, and the ramifications and memories of a traumatic past with the Troubles, which was a decades-long conflict, decades-long violent sectarian conflict, which lasted from the 1960s and ended in 1998. My research partner, Courtney Whittekind, and I had the privilege of living in a bed and breakfast with within a very small farming village called Donamana, with a population of roughly 550 people. More often than not, when we told people that we were there to learn more about life in Donamana, we were met with the response, well, why would you come all the way here? The village of Donamana itself is predominantly Protestant, over 80%, and is about a 10-minute drive through a 2-lane road and fields of pasture land to the closest town, Strabane, which sits on the Northern Ireland side of the Ireland-Northern Ireland border. This map shows only a portion of the 310-mile-long border between the two countries, and only a few of the 208 official border crossings. Along the edges of the small town of Donamana, the landscape looked like this. A few rows of housing communities punctuating the pasture lands, demarcated by decades-old hedgerows, and a rolling fog that seemed to have taken a break as it happily settled in. Here is a glimpse of the main thoroughfare that takes you through the town center, which sits at the junction of another dead-end road that'll take you up the hill at to a cafe diner that is as bustling as the 2 bars below it. We stayed with Billy and Helen Gamble, the owners of a bed and breakfast, along with a small cattle farm whose operations are slowing. To read from my field notes at the time, Billy was a sweet man who walked with stiff joints, the result of a lifetime of farming. He was born in the same farmhouse and lived in it all his life. Helen, who was the daughter of a farmer in Donegal, met Billy during a youth gathering disco night. They soon married and had 4 kids, now adults, with families of their own. During my time in Donnamana, I hoped to learn more about the concept of home along the borderlands and how the landscape and the people living in it construct ideas of home. Is home a contained space? Are the markers physical, or do they exist in the imagination? My work attempted to present a snapshot of village life, capturing the essence of home by the people who live there. And I did this via a simple task of distributing and collecting disposable cameras. I was able to distribute 3 disposable cameras to 3 villagers in Donnamana. And here is my engagement summary. Paired with my interviews and field notes, my goal was to get a visual representation of home in this small border village. Our instructor, Gareth Doherty, advised us that for every hour you spend in the field, we should be spending 4 hours taking field notes. Spending roughly 8 hours a day over the course of a week meant over 200 hours spent writing field notes. And I'm not saying I did it, but I tried. Um, the 3 participants had roughly 4 days to take photos of the aspects of their lives that remind them most of home before I came back to collect them. The images were developed following my return to the States, and the data here was obviously qualitative in nature. The first of 3 disposable cameras was given to Kathy, the middle-aged woman on the right who worked at the Hilltop Cafe. She was very excited about introducing us to all of the cafe regulars, one of whom was an elderly man named Joe, who worked as one of the 24 steeplejacks on the island, repairing and maintaining chimneys and churches throughout. Kathy had previously owned the cafe, but had given up ownership to Catherine, the woman on the left, after she had been struggling with personal finances. But here are some of Kathy's photos. They include a view while on a drive as the sun finally peeks out to reveal itself. A photo of the primary school where Kathy's daughter attends. The new soccer pitch across the way. A small moment of joy and a pot of daffodils in her neighborhood. Hedgerows everywhere you look. A photo of St. Patrick's Catholic Church, which sits at the edge of town, far from the Protestant churches in the center of the village. And of course, a photo of a small weekend breakfast rush at the Hilltop Cafe, where it's impossible to get a whole table to yourself unless you come early. While it's very easy to overly romanticize these photographs, what with their ethereal graininess, desaturation, and unintentional light leakages to the images, behind them is a photographer who seems to be dealing with a tension between the comfort and the burden of routine. From these photos, we see home as an amalgamation of stops in this tiny village of Donnamana. The second disposable camera was given to Ron, the owner of the local fish and chip shop on the main street. Ron is married to Catherine, who owns the Hilltop Cafe, and we saw earlier on the left, and talked our ear off about sports while we helped ourselves to a very large serving of fish and chips. The first image from Ron's camera was a view looking out from his chip shop, and the second opposite, the road looking back. The next photo was of the Tipsy Cow Bar, one of the 2 bars previously mentioned. And a few photos from a soccer game he attended with some friends in Belfast. The last of the 3 cameras was given to Cyril Downey, who I regrettably forgot to take a photo of. But Cyril is a bartender of the second pub and a few businesses down from Ron's fast food, called the Village Inn Pub, and was most eager to help us with our fieldwork. He has 3 kids, one of which is photographed here, who is a local champion step dancer. And in revisiting my field notes, I jotted down that when one of Searle's friends came into the bar, he introduced me and my research partners by saying, "These two students here want to study life in Donnamana. I think they're two psychiatrists and they've come to the right place." His daughter, shown here, would be going to Louisville that summer on a religious cultural exchange program. Searle was very unique in that he himself straddled cultural borders as a Protestant man married to a Catholic woman. Searle's wife is the blonde woman in the middle. And after a few hours talking to Searle at the pub, we met his eldest son from a previous marriage, Craig, an engineer working near Belfast who lamented at the lack of engineering jobs closer to the town to give educated young people, such as himself, an opportunity to stay in Donnamana and have, in his words, a stronger sense of self-worth. There was a lot of pensive and pent-up sadness in conversations at the pub, but I found it lovely that amidst the, quote, generations and generations of hurt, unquote, that Searle reflected on, the 4 photos he took on the camera were of his family, his home. The pages and photos were archived as part of a combined studio seminar report and traveling micro exhibition called The Atlas for a City Region,
Just a quick
reimagining the
liberated art.
post-Brexit landscapes of the Irish Northwest, presented to the Derry and Strabane District Council of Northern Ireland and the Donegal County Council of Ireland, who co-sponsored the research work. A small field note entry for the end of this engagement exercise writes, "This morning, our last in Donnamana was by far one of the fastest. We visited the Sunday cattle mart and spent about an hour watching sheep race into the pens, trying to find signs of who was bidding on the sheep. Afterwards, we collected cameras that we had given to Kathy, Ron, and Cyril and said our goodbyes. We waited for the bus to take us to Derry, thinking our wee sleepy village." In reflecting on this engagement strategy, it was clear to me that this exercise was one of reciprocal trust. Not all cameras we distributed made it back, but it is important to share that this trust was built on vulnerable human conversations and connection. Acknowledging that this was a short, one-off engagement exchange, I'm grateful to Kathy, Ron, and Cyril for entrusting us with these little personal glimpses of their home, whether it be part of their daily routine, their pilgrimage to watch a soccer match, or of their windswept family. My takeaway is, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, give someone a disposable camera and allow them to tell you 24,000. Every place has a story, and sometimes that story is best told through photographs. Shifting gears and returning to a hyper-local context, I want to bring us to Cambridge to look at a case study of a series of engagement events I helped execute as a project manager while in my previous role at the Cambridge-based firm Agency Landscape and Planning. The project is for the renovation of Raymond Park and Playground, a small neighborhood park west of Porter Square in Cambridge's Neighborhood 9. Here is a diagram of the existing park program, which includes a playground beneath a grove of beautiful mature trees to the north, a community garden to the northwest, a multi-use short court with basketball hoops to the south, and an open turf field used primarily in the summer by Cambridge's tot and youth soccer leagues. We performed preliminary demographic studies to learn that 50% of households surrounding the park have children, that 5% of the neighboring population had some sort of disability, and a little under a quarter of households speak languages other than English. As part of a more traditional design process, our goal from the engagement efforts was to collect multi-stage feedback to inform the design development of Raymond Park. This meant continuous communication and feedback across all stages of the design leading up to construction. I participated in 2 phases of the community engagement over the course of 12 weeks, which included pop-up events at neighboring communities and within the park itself, as well as asynchronous engagement efforts, like a scavenger hunt survey and a digital survey. As part of the scope of work, this project had an allocated community engagement budget, which allowed us to print materials, signs, and banners, and to get creative with the activities. This resulted in both quantitative and qualitative information to help propel the project forward. Because one of the main constituents of the park was children, we had buy-in from the city of Cambridge to lean into fun and whimsical engagement materials, including banners and signage that we hung across the park to keep people informed on the stage of design. We also had flyers and postcards that we printed and mailed to encourage nearby residents to take our digital survey, and had an in-park scavenger hunt to engage directly with kids at the park and give them an opportunity and activity for exploration. The scavenger hunt booklets included a good mix of qualitative and quantitative prompts. The qualitative being which entrance they used, how they arrived to the park, and how many people they see in the park, to quantitative prompts that asked them to search around the park for signs that would provide them with a question to answer. For example, the carrot sign at the community garden asked kids what they see at the community garden and what they wish to see. Or the dog marking that they finished the scavenger hunt and asking them what their favorite thing about Raymond Park is. We hung banners at the 3 park entrances and left the blank scavenger hunts and pens in acrylic boxes with a locked collection box zip tied to the community board to collect the finished scavenger hunt sheets. The day we put the scavenger hunt sheets out, we saw a group of kids across different ages running across the field with excitement, filling out the surveys and running to each of the 3 different points. This was a very successful way of collecting feedback over a longer period of time without much oversight, and showed that we could still bring a lot of joy to the engagement process even if we weren't on site. We also found that people across different age groups felt welcome to take part in the scavenger hunt component of the engagement, which we're very glad to see. From this first wave of engagement, which included both a digital survey and the scavenger hunt, we also collected demographic data on race and annual household income to help us learn if there were communities of people who were underrepresented in the engagement effort. We found that relative to the population surrounding the park, we didn't hear from as many Black and African American and Asian and East Asian families, as well as those whose family income was under $100,000. This engagement data was incredibly helpful because the community engagement effort would span many months across many design phases, giving us an opportunity to do better in reaching a representative group of people that was more reflective of our population data. The information from the first wave of engagement also allowed us, as the design leads, to clarify guiding principles that we would use and reference throughout the lifespan of the project. These were things that we heard Raymond Park does well and would benefit from minor tweaks to larger projective changes that would result in major shifts in park design. And these fed into concept and partie diagrams of how we could use 3 different schemes, or how we could design 3 different schemes. The first wave of engagement clarified 3 major themes: play and recreation, culture and community, and ecology and environment. Understanding that spatial concessions had to be made between play space, gathering space, and the larger field, how could each design push and pull at different aspects of the guiding principles, like dipoles competing for an electrical charge? 3 different schematic level designs emerged, as did a need for a second wave of engagement. Our goal was to include those involved in giving initial feedback, as well as those we missed in the first go around. We also created conceptual vignettes for these 3 schemes, as well as a scorecard that enumerated each of the unique ideas drawn in each of the 3 schemes. This provided a level of nuance to the feedback, as well as a sense of ownership for the design process that many community members are often not privy to. All of this information did require a level of in-person explanation during the pop-up events, but it was super important to us to empower people of all ages to give thoughtful feedback. This photo here was taken during our first early morning pop-up engagement session targeting dog walkers. And it was wonderful because we had people who remembered the first wave of engagement and were excited to come back and see how the concepts were developing. We also had to improvise and unfurl our vinyl banners on the grass because we had a critical mass of people at the park before we even began setting up. And throughout the process, we heard warnings and worries from our clients at the city of Cambridge that people were experiencing survey fatigue, but we didn't see much of that here. People were excited about the visioning process and the multiple engagement efforts throughout my time on the project. And that was because of the third takeaway of finding ways throughout the design process to share power and co-create. Community members and neighbors are more likely to support a project if given the real opportunity to shape it. And finally, we'll move from hyperlocal to a research project that I worked on with my partner, Michael Norton, across the globe in Beijing, China's Dongdan Park. And the project was called Queering Landscapes, Cruising, Sexual Performance, and Social Liberation. This work looked at Dongdan Park, which lies 2 kilometers east of Tiananmen Square, within the interior of Beijing's first ring road, and is notably one of the smallest parks in all of Beijing. With its unassuming concrete entrance opening up to a busy 6-lane road, at first glance, Dongdan Park looks like your average park. At any and all times of the day, you will find groups of people dancing and exercising at the plaza, people watching, getting haircuts, playing volleyball, and selling goods atop unfurled blankets, all while surrounded by a canopy of healthy, mature urban trees. But this park is one of contrasts. The southern portion of the park, shown here, is characterized by flat, open plaza spaces with constant activity any landscape architect would dream to find in a park. The northern half is dominated by the Garden Hill, a mound with an overlay of a circuitous path network, and a small gathering space at the base of the hill near the park's entrance, as well as a pavilion at its peak, shown like 2 seconds ago. This video here shows a walk from the pavilion at the top of the hill down to the base of the hill. For context, this hill was formed from the excavated soils from the construction of the subway line that now marks Beijing's old city walls. While the southern half of the park is booming with activity and music and screaming and laughter, the densely planted trees on the Garden Hill effectively screen all of this activity from view and block out any sound from the park's base. It's very quiet walking on the paths throughout the Garden Hill. And the trees and beautiful stone retaining walls truly give you a sense of walking through a forested hill. You could easily forget that you're in the heart of Beijing. Let this go for a few more seconds. There to the right are some of the retaining walls. Now over 10 years following its publishing in the San Diego Union Tribune newspaper back in 2015, this article made visible the culture of queer men seeking refuge at Dongdan's Garden Hill. For decades, Dongdan has been a popular yet hidden public cruising space, particularly for middle-aged men who move to Beijing from China's countryside in search of work and, more importantly, community. It is an easy simplification to over-sexualize the hill and reduce the significance of the safety and cover provided by the landscape to being something utilized for the sole purpose of satisfying a fleeting carnal need. However, I want to assert that the park is much more multifaceted in its function and role in the lives of the older generation of men of lower income and of lower social standing who flock to the space, sometimes daily, to connect with other comrades, a translated term of endearment used by men seeking men. Not only did Michael and I want to understand how the park's physical form promotes use by and safety for these men seeking men, but we wanted to do something, but we wanted to do so by while preserving their dignity. We were on site for 1.5 weeks, collecting qualitative information through the form of cognitive maps, or maps drawn of a space from memory. Cognitive mapping was a term coined by psychologist Edward Tolman in 1948 to describe the internal mental representation of a space's physical layout, effectively a mental map. There are many precedents that build on this idea of this work of cognitive mapping, and we were particularly inspired by Hisachika Takahashi's work, From Memory, Draw a Map of the United States. We are bombarded by maps and spatial infographics. And we often take this visual information for granted because maps and cartographic works have become so incredibly commonplace and reachable within the touch of a button. For example, looking to our phones for directions come as second nature to many. As part of this series, Takahashi asked his friends and fellow artists to create an analog representation of the United States using pens and paper. But here we see many alternatives of representing a single geography. Sometimes they quite literally represent drawings and the familiar borders many of us who have grown up in the United States have come quite accustomed to seeing and could ourselves replicate. Two examples that distill information of this vast country to key city flight paths. Or in this cheeky case of Joseph Koseth's cognitive map, the two major cities of Los Angeles and New York, as the two lone points in a sea of paper. Nobutaka Ozaki had another take on cognitive mapping where he collated a map of Manhattan by pretending he was a tourist, finding paper scraps nearby, and asking passerbys if they could assist him with drawing a map from point A to point B. Drawings on paper scraps, once assembled, become a tapestry of imagined geographies, a mesmerizing weaving of spatial memory. These examples confirm that mapping is an act of subjectivity, and decisions of what to present on a map and how we present them are the ultimate reflection of personal and even community values. What aspects or features do we include and name on our maps? And maybe more importantly, what features do we omit? I would be remiss if I also didn't recognize Kevin Lynch's work from The Image of the City, as he characterizes the elements of a city as path, edge, district, node, and landmark. And with this as a framework, we understand the cognitive maps drawn by men seeking men at Dongdan Park as a moment of cultural preservation, a personalized snapshot that provides a more holistic understanding of space use grounded in individual-centric internalization of environment and ultimately of self. Now I will take us through some of the maps and offer up some of the insights gleaned. Of the 10 cognitive maps during our research period, this presents the most idyllic in its ornamentation, with the perimeter of the park graced by a flock of birds in the sun. The path is dotted with pairs of the character for person, with a note from the author that many people often sit and chat in groups along the path where he sat to draw his map. The southern half of the park is represented with just the pine tree that you encounter when entering the space, a landmark insofar as it will lead you up the hill. The author of this map had, at the time, been in Beijing for 8 years and contemplated for a while about how to best draw the network of Dongdan's paths on the hill. He began from the east gate with a path up the hill to the central pavilion atop the mountain, and as parkgoers refer to the man-made pile of earth. He denotes areas by drawing circles in locations where people tend to congregate. Unlike how the path operates in reality, the path drawn here is a fiction. They are drawn not to bifurcate nor diverge into smaller paths as they actually do, but instead stay a continuous line that moves across the hill. Michael, my research partner, in his observations across multiple visits of the park, noted that this individual was restless and rarely stopped to sit despite the summer heat and humidity. With this in mind, this cognitive map makes sense and reflects very cogently a constant forward movement. The path is circuitous and winding, but the drawing almost suggests that if you keep moving forward, there's no possibility of getting lost. This map here was drawn by a man in his mid-20s and structures itself with respect to the open spaces within the park, using the paths to frame and contain the many flower beds and open plazas. Greater attention is paid to the paths on the south face of the hill, with the map maker representing a large oblong platform that juts out from the hill's southeastern face. The public restroom in the south corner of the park is also labeled, a space touted as a center of sexual activity, with many older parkgoers lamenting that it had been under construction for quite some time. This map gives consideration only to the hill itself, locating the pavilion at the very center of the landform's peak, from which 5 paths radiate out. But as maps were drawn, individuals would share rumors and stories of the happenings in the park, tales of thieves, lovers, violence, and most importantly, friendships. Questions were asked about the legalities of homosexuality in the United States, as well as the existence of similar parks and cruising spaces in North America, revealing a sincere curiosity about what it might be like had they lived in another country. This last cognitive map I'll show combines planimetric, sectional, and perspectival projections. It convincingly renders the three-dimensional landmass as an impenetrable tree cover along the hill with furious hatches, and the pavilion at the top a beacon if only you're brave enough to venture forth. As Catherine Harmon writes, of course, part of what fascinates us when looking at a map is inhabiting the mind of its maker, considering that particular terrain of imagination overlaid with those unique contour lines of experience. If I had mapped that landscape, we ask ourselves, what would I have chosen to show? And how would I have shown it? The coded visual language of maps is one we all know, but in making maps of our worlds, we each have our own dialect. A reductionist approach and view of this park as merely a site for cruising is a dangerous one. Because as these incredibly thoughtful cognitive maps show, for the people who frequent Dongdan, it's more than that. It's a delicate ecosystem of camaraderie, of intergenerational mentorship, and of queer joy and belonging. During our time there, we learned that most of the men who came to the Garden Hill at Dongdan learned about it through word of mouth. It was one of the few spaces, especially for migrants from the rural countryside, that was accepting of people of all ages who lacked the social and financial capital to enter Beijing's queer scene, both physical and virtual, through queer dating apps, or through queer dating and social apps. However, just 2 days ago, I saw a news headline that Apple had removed Blueweed and Finca, 2 of the most popular gay dating apps in China, from its app store, which could signal a renewed interest in physical spaces like Dongdan. This research was funded by Harvard GSD's Penny White Project Fund with support from Harvard's Open Gate Foundation for LGBTQ+ research to briefly share and exhibit the work and the maps at the GSD's quotes gallery wall shown here. As a tool for community engagement in the case of our work at Dongdan Park, cognitive mapping is an exercise in documentation and historical preservation. It is an attempt to record the space in the visual language of its users, a population that is slowly disappearing. It isolates Dongdan Park within a time and a context, providing many lenses through which to understand the space at this particular juncture of its story. And it gives way to our last lesson of the evening, which is to let people surprise you. The point of engagement is to enter a space with an open mind and an open heart, and to find excitement in the possibility that your conceptions of a space were maybe right, but even better, or maybe wrong. And thank you for allowing me to take you on this sort of worldwide journey and back again this evening. To give one final engagement summary, I want to remind you of my 4 project takeaways. One, that lived experience is expertise. When you are engaging with a group, lead with humility, as the community holds the knowledge you need as a designer, and the users will see to the ultimate success or failure of a project. 2, that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Be vulnerable in your approach and give people the opportunity to let you into their worlds. Your project will be much more richer because of them. 3, share power and co-create. Knowing when and how to relinquish control can be one of the most powerful things you do as a designer. And 4, let people surprise you. Whether it's uh, whether it's by striking up a conversation or letting community members hold the pen, surprises make the design that much more magical. Thank you.
And then we'll find if there are any. So thank you so much for that talk. And I'm curious how, in your role in the city of Somerville, you're bringing this idea of community as method.
Yeah, and part of it is that I am very lucky to be in a position in Somerville where I work in the public space and urban forestry division with 5 landscape architects and 2 arborists. So this community engagement as method or community as method, engagement as lesson, is embedded into our work as landscape architects. I don't have to compete with other people to advocate for the importance of this work. We are trying to embed it into the RFPs that we write, into the project proposals that we receive, and into who we select as landscape architects to work on the projects. All right, should we call it? Oh, question.
So my question is, in a lot of these places, like in Beijing and in Ireland, you only had a week to conduct your community engagement. While in Cambridge, obviously, you were able to do like a 12-week
Right.
program. So how do you think if you had more time in these different places, you would have altered your community engagement or the experiments that you conducted?
Yeah, I think in Ireland it would have been incredible to have some of those photos developed in situ and have an opportunity to talk through them with some of the participants. I am still in touch with a few of the people in Ireland through Facebook and Instagram, so that opportunity was there. But I think the more deeper analysis could have been fleshed out through a longer period of time.
Much.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
I just wanted to say that your approach is astounding. It's really interesting to hear you talk about your work. And I wanted to know, in terms of architecture itself, how can your approach, getting to know the community and really feeling like part of things, be applied to the world of architecture? And how do you think architects can design buildings in this way, that's really centered around community? I think it's super important in the world of landscape architecture. But with architects in mind, how do you think the design of buildings can be reliant on community engagement and community needs?
Sure, and I think part of it is a distinction that you're making that these 2 fields or methods of engagement are different, but I think they don't need to be, right? At the end, we are still designing space. People still occupy them, and it is important to make sure that the engagement process is still relevant. Um, and because it is in architecture as well, people still need to think about how they move through the space, how they occupy it, and we as architects and designers may think we know, but again, let people surprise you, right? There are opportunities that you use a space differently than you might expect. And so I think that this application, this method is still applicable to architecture, and don't let anyone tell you that it's not.
Two questions from online. Samantha asks, how did you develop the engagement strategies prior to beginning each one in person?
Sure. For the case in Oaxaca, again, it was mostly tied to the information that we needed to understand mezcal, right? So daily life, water, land, and again, the need to be able to contain all of that information and bring it back was very important to us. In Ireland, that was a bit more, or we were allowed to be a bit more free with the engagement approach. So cameras felt like a fun way to explore the visual side of engagement. In Cambridge, with Raymond Park, um, it was a much more sort of defined practice approach. And so we were, as I said, we were given a budget, which was awesome. And it allowed us to be very whimsical and have fun with it. So we designed a scavenger hunt because we knew there were going to be kids. We wanted to break the mold of a standard community meeting or a place the dot on your favorite activity. And then in the Beijing example, really just wanting to understand how people see and move through the world. And so we did that through drawing.
Thank you. And the second question is from faculty member Davis Hart in Oregon, who teaches in our Design for Human Health program. First, she said this was incredible. Her two questions are, what surprised you most about your work on the projects? And would you consider this work rapid ethnography?
I'd have to think more about the term rapid ethnography I especially with the work in Ireland, it was definitely an ethnographic approach. Um, but sorry, can you repeat the first question? What surprised us most? I think the sort of reciprocal empathy for the work was what surprised me the most, and the it's not. I wanted to change the title from community engagement to human engagement because that felt like the most important and surprising in the work. The one-to-one conversations, the way that fed and led into all of the other design work.